Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another video episode at ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian. I'm here today at the Rock Island Auction House, taking a look at some of the cool guns that they have coming up for sale in their upcoming April 2015 premiere auction. This particular one, I have to say, is one of the coolest, most unusual, interesting handguns I've ever run into, and it's just really fascinating. This is a prototype Hammond automatic pistol. They're usually referred to as Grant Hammond pistols, which is a little bit odd, in that they weren't designed by two guys named Grant and Hammond. They were designed by one guy named Grant Hammond. So typically we would normally call that a Hammond pistol, but somehow they've come into common usage as Grant Hammond pistols. Now, the place where, if you've heard of these, you will have heard of them, is with the .45 caliber version that was submitted to U.S. Army testing in 1917. It didn't pass the testing. It was found to be a very accurate pistol, but not a particularly durable pistol. It had a lot of malfunctions and a lot of parts breakage in its testing. It did go so far as to go through a 5,000 round endurance test, but it had something like 154 malfunctions and parts breakages during that test, and just wasn't up to snuff. Of course, that was also 1917 and 1918. The 1911 had already been adopted, so Hammond was kind of a little bit late into the game on that. However, that pistol actually works totally differently than this one in most ways. This is a .32 caliber, most likely a proof of concept pistol, developed in-house just as a shop experiment. It doesn't have any serial numbers. It actually doesn't have any markings whatsoever, but we can recognize it from the Hammond patent drawings. And it is this unusual, weird hybrid of kind of a blow forward and kind of a blow back design, in addition to having this very interesting feature that did carry over to the .45 version, namely it automatically ejected your magazine when you fired the last cartridge. So without any further ado, I'm going to bring the camera back here because I'm really eager to show you guys how this weird thing works. All right, so there's a lot that we need to look at when we consider this pistol. I'm going to start with the magazine out because, frankly, part of what we need to look at involves how the magazine works, and that's going to add an element that we just don't need to deal with quite yet. So the way that this pistol functions is that the rifled barrel goes to about here, and after that it's smoothbore, and in between the two there's a little gap. This whole barrel sleeve is hollow, and what happens is the bullet gets to about here, at which point it has cleared that little gap. The gas behind it then fills up this sleeve, which actually forces this barrel shroud and slide to go forward. Now the bolt stays where it is because it's under spring pressure. The slide, this has a really stiff spring in it. The slide comes all the way out to here, by which time the bullet has left the barrel. So then this really strong spring starts to pull the slide backwards. The slide grabs the bolt and pulls it along at the same time. It recocks the hammer on its way back. Now I'm going to let it go right there. In theory, this will go a little bit farther, but it's sticky, and so I've got it at a point where it'll hold by itself. The bolt is now all the way back, so in theory what it would do, as soon as this slide comes the rest of the way back, it trips a release, which allows the bolt to come forward. The bolt would pick up a cartridge from the magazine, feed it into the chamber, the hammer has been recocked, and you're ready to fire again. All right, I believe the locking system in this particular example is not quite working right now, but I'll go through how I'm pretty sure it works. You can see we have a recess right here. I think this one came from a previous experiment and is not actually used by the pistol in its current configuration. We also have a locking lug right here. So there's a locking lug, and I don't know if the camera can catch it. Yeah, right inside there is another locking lug, very much like this one. And while I can't see it, I believe there is another cutout like this one located right back in here. So what happens is when the bolt goes forward, this catch right here gets pushed backwards so that this little lug disengages, and then I believe that the two locking lugs here and up inside here are allowed to rotate, and they rotate, and they would rotate clockwise, so they're going to rotate up this direction into these recesses, locking the action. I believe that's how it's supposed to work. And that is what keeps the bolt locked in its forward position when the slide goes forward, because it is the action of the slide catching. There's a catch back here somewhere that grabs the bolt when the slide's coming backwards to force it to rotate and open. Now, that of course isn't working right now, so I can't prove it, but I'm pretty sure that's the idea. We can also see it appears to be missing a part right up here. It's hard for me to tell if that's something that is actually necessary in its current configuration, or if that was a previous experiment with the gun and is a part that's no longer necessary. I just don't have enough information about it to be able to determine that. All right, now let's look at how things get a little bit weirder. We have our magazine here, and you can see it's got this weird spring clip that you aren't used to seeing in magazines. When I push the follower down, that little clip lifts up, and that's going to be very important. This is how the magazine, quote unquote, knows if it's loaded or not. If you're putting a loaded magazine in the gun, this catch protrudes. If you have an empty magazine in the gun, it's flat with the surface of the magazine. So with that in mind, let's go back to the pistol. You may notice that there is no magazine catch. There's no magazine release anywhere on here. There isn't a heel release. That presumably is one of the mainspring held in there. We've got this little plunger, and it's spring-loaded. That's what kicks the magazine out when it's empty, but there's no way to manually release a magazine. So we will insert our hypothetical loaded magazine. You see it sits a little bit below the level of the frame, but I can't pull it out. Pry in there with a fingernail, it's locked in place, it's not coming out. Now, in this situation, what we would theoretically have is the last round in the magazine has now been loaded, the hammer's cocked, and it's ready to fire. When I fire it, we'll set off the primer, which causes gas to come in here, which means the slide comes forward. When the slide goes back, it's going to trip a release and dump the magazine. Just like that. Now, if I try and insert an unloaded magazine, I can't do it. It just falls out of the gun. If I had a dummy round, which I don't have with me, to put in there, it would push the follower down, which would bump this little catch out. That, I expect, when it went in, would trigger the bolt release, close the bolt, and chamber a new round so you'd be ready to fire again. Now, I do have a manual control to release the bolt, and that's this lever. Now, as the bolt goes forward, the magazine is locked in place. So once again, we now theoretically have an empty magazine in the gun, one round in the chamber. When we fire, this comes forward, drops back, and without enough force, it won't do it. And there goes our magazine pushed out by the force of this little plunger. This locks open. So in theory, this is a very efficient gun. It does a lot of operations for you. If you're shooting, as soon as you empty the mag, it automatically dumps it out, it locks open. As soon as you insert a loaded mag back into it, it'll automatically close and you can keep firing. Pretty cool idea, it's just they happen to use this ridiculously complicated mechanism to go about achieving it. So a .32 caliber cartridge doesn't need an elaborate locking mechanism of this type, which makes it seems very likely that this was done as a proof of concept to see if this whole crazy idea would actually work. You do it in .32 where you have lower pressures and it's easier to tweak things. And then if it works well, then you try scaling it up to something like 45, where a locked breech is actually necessary. In this case, I think they came to the conclusion that it didn't work all that well because this whole system is completely absent from the .45 caliber Grant Hammond pistols. They use a pivoting or a falling block instead. Totally different mechanism, which we need to get our hands on one of those pistols in order to properly explain. All right, well, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. This is definitely a once-in-a-lifetime kind of thing to get to take a look at. Extremely unusual. Like I said, probably one of the weirdest, neatest pistols I've ever run into. If you're as into it as I am, you do, of course, have the option to buy it and make it yours. It will be up for sale in the April 2015 Rock Island Premier Auction. I have a link right below to the catalog page for it, where you can take a look at their catalog write-up, their high-res pictures, and everything you need right there on the website to create an account and bid online, or get directions to come down here to Rock Island and take a look at it yourself and participate live in the auction. Thanks for watching, and good luck.